So what the fuck, random internet guy? You don't like Preston Jacobs' explanation? You don't like the Order of the Green Hands explanation? Let me guess, you think the vanilla explanation is stupid too, don't you? Well, I do think it requires some modifications, and we are going to have to get to those later. Hello and welcome to part 2 of our Littlefinger adventure. In the previous video, we talked about the origins of Littlefinger, and we went over some theories about potentially what inspired him to start taking the actions he's taking in the book series proper. We also examined the possibilities of on what level Littlefinger is playing the game, if he happens to be playing it. But we didn't get incredibly far, and there's a few things we have to go over. Additionally, I have a few questions to pose for the vanilla conceptuality of Littlefinger's early life. And after all that, we'll start digging in and diving into a whole series of theories about what exactly Littlefinger is up to in the books, and hopefully we'll see if any of this can help us pin down what we think Littlefinger may or may not actually be doing in entirety. So strap on your bronze caps and grab your 3 spears, because we're about to go on a long fucking march through Littlefinger. So last time I may have said or implied that we were done with Littlefinger's early life. That was a lie. So we're going to talk about 2 topics here that involve actions that take place prior to the start of our book series. One of these because I kind of just changed my mind and decided I wanted to talk about it now, and the other one of these because I did not actually know it was a theory up until, yesterday. Now, I really like both these theories, however, I do believe they fall into what would be considered the rather tinfoil category. The former certainly less so than the latter, but on the scale of 1 to Alex Jones, they probably fall somewhere near a...
Boniface Hasty of the Holy Hundred has Dark Sister.
Alright, so the first idea we're going to shake a stick at here is the idea that Littlefinger is actually Sweetrobin's father. This is the one I was going to address later, but because the events it theorizes on occurs before the books start, I changed my mind and decided we should just talk about it now. And with that, let's take a glance at the theory courtesy of Glidus.
But what could Sweetrobin have to do with any of this seed is strong stuff? John was investigating lineages and genetics, but Sweetrobin doesn't really look like John at all, so why would he say the seed is strong about Sweetrobin? The whole thing is about proving bastardy, and it's not like Sweetrobin is a bastard or anything. It's not like his parents don't really like each other, and it's not like his dad has fertility issues, and it's not like his mother has a known lover who kinda looks like him, or...
So yeah, that's the gist of the theory, and on its surface it might seem rather tangential, and like I said, it might seem rather tinfoil. However, I think there is some credible evidence and some really good reasons why we should give credence to this theory, and I'm going to return to this theory as a potential tie-in option for what I think is Littlefinger's ultimate master plan, or objective, if you will. So let's go over the evidence really quick, and then I will offer you another point of evidence that I believe helps back up this theory. So the initial evidence for and concern with this theory comes from the fact that Jon Arryn has only been able to father Sweetrobin in his long life and his considerable list of marriages. He has had 3 wives, all of whom he was unable to father children on. So it's a little whack that in this 11th hour, last minute, plus 70 years of his life, Jon Arryn is magically fathering a child after such a long time of not being able to father children. So if Jon Arryn is unable to father children on Lysa Tully, and we know for a fact that someone who looks like Sweetrobin, who has already successfully fathered a child on Lysa Tully, is near Lysa Tully, and we know there's a high likelihood that they will continue to have sexual relations given her sexual interest in this character, we can safely assume that there might be another figure in the room who could be Sweetrobin's parent. Additionally, Jon Arryn is doing research that is implying that dark hair wins out over light hairs when it comes to offspring, i.e., the dark-haired Baratheons should be producing dark-haired children with the light-haired Lannisters, and the fact that the Arryns are supposedly having sex and producing non-recessive-haired children in spite both parents having recessive hair traits. It's kind of like a little inversion scenario. Jon Arryn has light hair, and he's married to a light-haired woman. Their kid should be light-haired. Robert Baratheon has dark hair, and the Lannister woman has light hair, therefore his kid should be dark-haired. He has similar genetic concepts in front of him at the exact same time when he dies. The debate only centers around whether or not he was referencing these concepts in the seed is strong statement. And the great and amazing end twist to this theory is, of course, that there is this concept that mockingbirds lay alien eggs in other birds' nests, forcing other birds to essentially raise the mockingbird's child as their own without their knowledge.
An idea that they pretty much stole from the cuckoos. Mockingbirds are known to lay alien eggs, which are basically children of their own in other birds' nests. These chicks will force the true-born hatchlings from the nest and take all of the food for themselves, forcing the foster parents to raise them as their own. Whoa.
Couple that with Peter Baelish's symbol being the mockingbird, and we have a very interesting theory and potential going on here. Now I have to say, because I like the sound of the theory, and because it is fun, and because it fits very well into my conception of Littlefinger and his end goals, my mind flashed to a certain quote in the books. And I'll play that here in a second, but I want to play some of the additional evidence that Glidus puts in front of us first.
Here's some more support in the text for the idea that Sweetrobin is Baelish's son. After they're reuniting in the Vale, Lysa says to Peter that she wants to make another child. Another. This might be in reference to their aborted child from Riverrun all those years ago, but she mentions Sweetrobin in the same breath, so I have to think twice about this line. Oh, and Lysa also tells us that Jon could no more give her pleasure than he could give her children, which, while definitely too much information, implies that Jon gave her no children.
And now, for your listening pleasure, myself as Lysa Tully in Chapter 68, Sansa 6, A Storm of Swords. No, she stamped her foot. I want you now, this very night, and I must warn you, after all these years of silence and whisperings, I mean to scream when you love me. I'm going to scream so loud they'll hear me in the Eyrie. So, yeah. And if you look at the sentence, there's not even a period in between those two concepts. There have been years of silence and whisperings, but now she means to scream when he loves her. One, let's look at the words silence and whisperings. Obviously, if you're being fucked by Jon old-ass man Aaron, you probably aren't screaming in orgasm, so I can absolutely buy the silence. That makes perfect sense. Whisperings, though? No, whisperings are something that is done in secret. Whisperings are something that is done when you don't want things to be discovered, when you don't want things to be heard. Whisperings are kind of the antithesis of screaming, but whisperings are also something done with people you trust, or at least people you'd like to trust. So maybe it's my overzealousness to buy into this theory talking, but in one sentence, Lysa Tully basically does cop to having been banging Littlefinger for X amount of years in secret. Again, we're going to return to all this later, so I want to put this on the back burner for right now, but mull over that line yourself, leave me a comment, tell me what you think. Because I think this is a really interesting theory. But for now, let's move on. Because we're going to dip our toes into the idea that Littlefinger caused Robert's rebellion. I found this theory presented by a channel called In Deep Geeks.
Robert's rebellion was built on a lie. But whose lie was it?
So in a nutshell, the heart of the theory goes something like this. Lyanna was left by her father at Harrenhal, was then kidnapped nearby Harrenhal being the castle that Oswald Whent hails from, making this process easier for Rhaegar. The kidnapping party passed by the inn at the crossroads, and seeing how the inn at the crossroads was not only located very close to Harrenhal, but also located on the exact path Littlefinger would have been traveling to return home from Riverrun post his injuries given by Brandon Stark, Littlefinger ran into the kidnapping party at the inn at the crossroads. Furthermore, Brandon Stark, who was incensed about Littlefinger's behavior, according to the theory, would have been hunting for him in the Riverlands, seeking to find him, more than likely at the inn at the crossroads.
Ostensibly, he was journeying off for a couple of months to meet his father on the road and then coming back to Riverrun with him, but all we know of Brandon suggests that he won't have wanted to leave the slight to his betrothed and her sister's honour to go unavenged. He had to be physically restrained when Rhaegar crowned Lyanna Queen of Love and Beauty, and when he was told she had been abducted, he immediately rushed to King's Landing intent on killing Rhaegar. What do we think he will have done when someone claimed to have slept with his betrothed, and then, just 2 weeks after fighting to win her hand, makes her sister pregnant? He will have been livid. I think he went after Littlefinger.
Upon finding Littlefinger at the crossroads, would have been informed by Littlefinger that Lyanna Stark had been kidnapped by Rhaegar Targaryen. This would have been a plot contrived by Littlefinger to save himself from some supposed retribution that Brandon would have been seeking to deliver.
Which leaves the third option, which seems most likely to me, that whoever told him about it lied. They probably had seen Rhaegar and Lyanna together, but they lied and said that Rhaegar abducted Lyanna, knowing what Brandon's reaction would be. But who would say that, and why? Well, we have a pretty strong candidate, don't we? Someone with a huge grudge against Brandon Stark, someone who desperately wanted him out of the way so that he could continue his delusion that perhaps one day possibly Cat might marry him, someone who became quite a specialist in lies, Littlefinger.
So like I said before, I also really enjoy this theory. However, as far as I can tell, there is no actual textual evidence to imply the theory could be true. Something that I found pretty interesting about this theory was the fact that it works pretty well as a standalone theory until you add Littlefinger to the equation. The idea that the kidnapping occurred at the end of the crossroads is quite intriguing. However, attaching Littlefinger is impossible if we want something of substance or something that we can support in any realistic way. So regretfully, as much as I would like to ascribe these actions to Littlefinger, we're going to have to set this theory aside as simply not being verifiable. Now, if you don't mind, we're going to shift gears briefly for just a moment. I want to drop down 3 ideas and considerations that I want you to apply to the vanilla conceptuality of Littlefinger's life that were presented. Something that is nearly universally assumed and addressed in most theories is the idea that Baelish stayed in love with Catelyn Tully post the duel with Brandon Stark and her never answering his final letter. As far as I can tell, the evidence put forth for Littlefinger remaining in love with Catelyn Stark comes down to he was infatuated with Cat as a child and was obsessed with her, and he tells Lysa Tully the only woman he ever loved was Cat before pushing Lysa out the moon door. Now, maybe I'm forgetting something other than the belief that Littlefinger's feelings never changed, put forth by other characters. However, if I'm not forgetting something crucial, then we as theorists and readers have been ascribing feelings to Littlefinger for many years now that I don't think we can necessarily justify, especially given Littlefinger's actions towards Catelyn, and/or lack of actions towards Catelyn. I don't want to waste too much time, so we're going to return to this idea again when we go over Littlefinger in greater detail, chapter by chapter. However, I think it's important that we at least start challenging the idea that these things might be truths. Something else that I want to bring up is the lack of perceived resentment against House Tully, Stark, and Arryn. We don't see a lot of characters thinking about and speculating what Littlefinger might be boiling on. We kind of just have our characters assume that he got over whatever previous resentments he had, and has moved on in his life. Now obviously we as the reader feel that Littlefinger is harboring lots of resentment, but I think we might need to expand the scope of how we view this. For example, Catelyn never ponders how much Littlefinger must absolutely fucking loathe her father. She spends a lot more time thinking about how much her father wronged Lysa than how much her father wronged Littlefinger. And surely we could argue about what constitutes the wronging of somebody and morality and many of those things, but I don't think we can argue about whether or not Hoster's actions would have generated enormous amounts of resentment in Littlefinger, given who Littlefinger is as a person in our story. And given that Catelyn spends a lot of time thinking about the way Hoster treated Lysa, I think it's only fair that we, the readers, give a lot of thought to thinking about how Littlefinger must have perceived his treatment by Hoster Tully. Again, maybe I'm underthinking this or overthinking this or underreading it or overreading it, but the amount of resentment other characters and readers seem to assume Littlefinger has is always very low in my mind, and that was very surprising to me. So I'd like to put this into the bucket of thoughts that we question when we think of the vanilla Littlefinger concept. And lastly, I want us to take a brief minute to think about Littlefinger's desire for power and wealth in general. At least to me, it seems that most people believe, in some regard or another, that Littlefinger's end result goal is wealth and power. That those are things he covets over pretty much anything else. And this never exactly jived with my perceptions of Littlefinger. Outside his personal dress, Littlefinger lives a seemingly very, very modest lifestyle, given the amount of wealth he should be able to personally generate for himself based on his own investments, and the wealth that he should have access to at his fingertips given the way he's running the economy. I'd like to point out that Littlefinger never attempts to acquire any valuable lands for himself, and he never seems to make any attempts to improve the lands he currently holds. To me, Littlefinger doesn't operate the way other people who are obsessed with wealth and power operate, and that should be taken into consideration when we attempt to figure out what his goals are. Okay, we've rejected the idea that Littlefinger is obsessed with prophecy. We've rejected the idea that Littlefinger is a telepath, a skin changer, or the target of some sort of telepathic skin-changing entity. And we've rejected the narrow conceptualization of vanilla Littlefinger in favor of a slightly broader spectrum that we're exploring. But that's all in Littlefinger's early life. What about Littlefinger's current life? What the fuck is this motherfucker up to in the books proper? Well, fortunately for you guys, when I was putting this video together, I got a call from my good buddy Dr. Dre, and I was able to convince him to fly Alt-Shift-X out here to drop a hot new track explaining the basics of Littlefinger's schemes and actions in the books. Alright, Dre, X, what do you say we hit him with the beat?
My name's Alt-Shift-X. I like badminton and
then Season 1 begins, with the death of the Hand of the King, Jon Arryn. We find out in Season 4 that the killer of Jon Arryn was his wife, Lysa. Littlefinger got Lysa, his childhood friend and the woman who's still devoted to him, to poison Jon, and then tell her sister Catelyn that the Lannisters did it. When Catelyn comes to King's Landing to tell Ned about the attempted killing of Bran, which was possibly ordered by Joffrey, but we don't know, Littlefinger lies and tells Catelyn that the dagger used was Tyrion's, leading Cat to capture and wrongly accuse the dwarf. Meanwhile, Peter helps Ned uncover Jaime and Cersei's incestuous secret, but when Eddard confronts the Lannisters, Peter betrays him, and soon, Ned's dead. All three of these moves were deliberate attempts by Littlefinger to create conflict between the Lannisters and the Starks. And it works. Peter Baelish, indirectly, without implicating himself, started the War of the Five Kings. In Season 2, Littlefinger negotiates an alliance with the Tyrells. This alliance saves the Lannisters in the Battle of Blackwater, so Littlefinger is rewarded with the castle of Harrenhal and rule of the Riverlands. With this higher status, and again because of the war, Littlefinger is sent to marry Lysa in order to secure the military support of the Vale, just about the only region untouched by the war. So he goes and marries the woman who loves him, and then he kills her. With Lysa gone and Jon Arryn already dead, Robert Arryn is the only thing standing between Littlefinger and control of the Vale. On his way out of King's Landing, Peter does two things. He helps kill King Joffrey, and he takes Sansa Stark. Of course, Sansa is already married, so her current husband Tyrion would have to die for her to marry again. But how could the brother of the Queen possibly die? Littlefinger, by the way, was the one to arrange this little entertainment, which succeeded in creating public conflict between Tyrion and Joffrey just before the king died, helping to frame Tyrion for the murder and be sentenced to death, freeing Sansa up for marriage. Or it would've if Tyrion didn't escape. Anyway, so at the start of Season 1, Peter Baelish was Master of Coin at King's Landing, with this little nowhere as his official seat. Now, he's sitting in the Eyrie, probably the safest place in Westeros, with control of the Vale, of the Riverlands, potentially of the North, and with the embodiment of the dead woman he loves in an obsessive Gatsby-esque kind of a way. Without lifting a sword, he has won the two things he desires: power and Catelyn. Of course, both of those things come with fairly large asterisks.
So that's the traditionalist, on its face, vanilla story. And the theories that we're going to look at that expand off of this surround the Purple Wedding and the attempted murder of Brandon Stark. YouTubers Hills Alive and Preston Jacobs have done some very exciting and interesting deep dives into the Purple Wedding, and I think they compile the evidence in the best forms, so I'm going to use those two videos as my reference points here.
Littlefinger has directly claimed responsibility and admitted that he colluded with the Tyrells to get rid of Joffrey by using poison hidden in Sansa's hairnet.
Now, there's quite a few things wrong with this story. One, why would Olenna align with Littlefinger?
Peter Baelish undoubtedly is not as overtly villainous in the books as he was in the TV series. But the notion that the Tyrells would trust him enough to needlessly involve him in a plot to literally assassinate the king is insane. And it's bizarre that more fans don't question this narrative.
2. Why the Strangler in wine? The poison that kills Joffrey is the Strangler, and is designed to make it look like someone choked. George R. Martin even specifically says that the Strangler was used for that reason. Okay then, why put it in something you can't really choke on? Why put it in wine? 3. Why involve Sansa and Dantos? Why give the poison to an irresponsible drunk to pass to a 13-year-old girl?
This is a dangerous plan that could literally mean the unimaginably horrific deaths of everyone involved. And it all would have been cut off at the knees if a teenage girl just decided that she wanted to wear something else that day.
Let's remember that Littlefinger is perhaps the biggest liar of our story. Can he really be trusted?
If you just abducted a 13-year-old girl that you barely know, why in the world would you explain to her exactly how you and another outrageously powerful family assassinated the king?
When it comes down to it, the story Littlefinger puts forward doesn't really make sense. The plan is overly complicated. The poison goes from Littlefinger to Dantos to Sansa to Olenna to the Chalice. It could easily just be Olenna to the Chalice. Why involve Littlefinger, Dantos, Sansa, and some jousting dwarves? And why involve a conspiracy of people if you're just gonna have to do the killing in the end? What's one more catspaw at this point? It's also overly dangerous. Why poison wine that could be drunk by Marjorie? And why involve people like Littlefinger and Dantos who have no reason to help you and every reason to turn you in?
And I would like to suggest that you actually go watch them because we're probably going to spend a little bit less time tearing them apart than you might think. And the reason is there's really only one thing to examine here, and that's that they come to two different conclusions. Not about Littlefinger's involvement with the Tyrells. Both theories, in fact, reject the idea that the Tyrells were involved in the assassination and the poisoning, but the theories differ on who the target was. Hills Alive sticks to the more vanilla belief that the target was King Joffrey Baratheon.
It was about creating a frightening and intimidating event that would have a ripple effect on everyone in the country.
Whereas Preston Jacobs constructs a very accurate argument that the target was actually Tyrion.
So these are the 6 people that were in the vicinity of the wine and the pie and were capable of wrongdoing. I'd like to stress again that we don't know if Joffrey was the target, and we don't know if it was the wine that was actually poisoned. We are essentially left with 2 possibilities. Option A, the Queen of Thorns poisoned Joffrey's wine when everyone was distracted by the pigeons. She didn't really have access to the pie. Or option B, Server X poisoned Tyrion's pie. He could have either brought in his own poison, or he could have gotten the poison from Sansa's hairnet when she was in shock from Sir Ilyn's sword, or when she was distracted by the pigeons. He could then have placed the poison on top of the pie and covered it with lemon cream, where it dissolved. Joffrey dying was simply a mistake, as Tyrion was the true target. Server X was simply hired by Littlefinger. Littlefinger was trying to kill Tyrion and accidentally killed Joffrey. After all, unlike Joffrey, Littlefinger had a huge motive for killing Tyrion. Tyrion claimed he knew who killed Jon Arryn right to Littlefinger's face back in A Clash of Kings. He then made Littlefinger furious by offering him Harrenhal and a Myrcella Sweetrobin marriage, only to then rescind it. And let's not forget that Tyrion knows that Littlefinger lied about the Valyrian dagger that was used to attack Bran. Not to mention, Sir Mandon Moore was put on the Kingsguard by Jon Arryn even though he didn't like him. Meaning he was likely put there because Lysa Arryn liked him, which means he was likely a Littlefinger crony. And Sir Mandon did try to kill Tyrion at the Blackwater. Now you may ask, if the Queen of Thorns is innocent, why did she walk up to Sansa and say, "The wind has been at your hair though," and then straighten her hairnet? Well, what if the wind had been at Sansa's hair? What if her hairnet was crooked? That seems a lot more likely than putting together a convoluted plan with Littlefinger that ends with her murdering a 13-year-old boy herself. And that is some food for thought regarding the Purple Wedding. Once again, I'm probably wrong about half of this.
Now, I'd like to again say that you should go listen to both theories yourself, but I'm also going to tell you why I much prefer the Preston Jacobs theory over the Hills Alive version. The first reason being it just makes more sense. Yes, Littlefinger does tell us that he sometimes kills people for absolutely no fucking reason. Do we ever see Littlefinger doing this in any hard evidence context? Do we have any reason to believe that he's not lying to Sansa? Do we have any reason to believe Littlefinger? We do, however, know Littlefinger wants Tyrion dead. So it's much more rational to assume that Littlefinger was attempting to kill the person he was attempting to kill, rather than the more roundabout concept of poisoning the king randomly to fuck with everybody else so as to get them to then kill Tyrion. Well, what if that didn't happen that way? There's too many things that could have gone wrong, and we know that Littlefinger's objective involves an unmarried Sansa. Furthermore, if Littlefinger was the poisoner, it makes his blaming of the Tyrells make a lot more sense. The Tyrells were probably the intended fall people. The Lannisters already know the Tyrells were conspiring to spirit Sansa off to Highgarden. It's in fact why they married her to Tyrion. So on the heels of this wedding, the killing of Tyrion and the freeing up of Sansa would look awfully suspicious, and suspicions would point towards the Tyrells. Sansa's disappearance would also then look even more suspicious, as the Tyrells were intending to disappear her off to Highgarden. In fact, if one were simply to know about Cersei Lannister's overt distrust of the Tyrells, and/or her overt hatred of the Tyrells, it would be super easy to turn this into a Lion against the Rose scenario, instantaneously. There is, on the ground level, an explanation that makes a lot more sense than any of the other explanations that are being put forth. It's the most direct, it's the one that suits the most pre-existing circumstances and plans, and it's the one that ultimately is the biggest play for Littlefinger, who we do know is behind the whole thing. As Preston Jacobs brings up in the theory, it also makes a bunch of the peripheral events make a lot more sense, including the jousting dwarves. Again, go check out the videos and you'll see what I mean. I believe Preston Jacobs puts forth the most viable option here. So I think we should take this theory away and add it onto the conception of Littlefinger 2.0 that we're building in our minds. A similar situation occurs with the incident that sparked the War of the Five Kings itself, the attempted murder of Bran. And again, two YouTubers, Preston Jacobs and Order of the Green Hand, both have interesting theories surrounding what happened here. They also both share the conclusion that Littlefinger is the ultimate party responsible, and that was not actually Joffrey acting solely alone or deciding on a wing to hire a cat's paw.
Now, one thing that is absolutely baffling is why on earth Joffrey needed to provide a cat's paw with a dagger. Are daggers and knives hard to come by in Westeros? Let's say knives are hard to come by. Wouldn't a pitchfork from the stables work just as well in killing Bran? Or, a rock? Or one's hands? Providing a dagger is simply gratuitous. In fact, it's so gratuitous that it makes it look like someone wanted things to be traced back.
First of all, there is no way that Joffrey did this because he's vicious and stupid like Tyrion thinks, or because he wanted to impress his father like Jaime thinks, because both of those scenarios have the same massive hole in them. The random cutthroat that happened to be readily available for Joffrey to hire would most likely have just taken the bag of silver and left Winterfell right after the royal party, knowing that Joffrey would never find him, instead of risking his life trying to kill a great lord's son when he had already been paid for the job. So that either leaves the possibility that the single most honorable cutthroat in the Seven Kingdoms happened to be there and made himself available to Joffrey, which I have no idea how that would have worked, because Joffrey would have had to have walked up to the cutthroat, not knowing how he would react, and suggest killing the son of the lord whose castle they are in, or the cutthroat would have to offer his services to Joffrey, without any reason to think Joffrey needed an assassin for hire, and having no idea how the Crown Prince would respond to such a man making him such an offer.
And now Tyrion sets aside his original reason for suspecting Joffrey in the first place. Again, Tyrion only suspected Joffrey because Joffrey boasted that he knew Valyrian steel. He then thinks Joffrey is arrogant, vicious, and stupid enough to use a dagger that can be traced back to him. And then he recalls that Joffrey had mused about sending a dog to kill a wolf. But as we discussed, none of these reasons make any sense. Joffrey never said send a dog to kill a wolf. He said send a dog to kill a dog, as in the Hound going to kill Summer, not a catspaw killing Bran. And apparently Joffrey isn't stupid because he was clever enough to not use the Hound and to wait 8 days. And apparently he's now not arrogant enough to use a dagger that could be traced back to him, as Tyrion is now claiming that Joffrey didn't know the dagger was special. And now finally the very thing that caused Tyrion's initial suspicion has been set aside because it doesn't fit. Tyrion now thinks Joffrey doesn't know Valyrian steel, which means any pauses that Joffrey made during breakfast would be innocuous, which means there was absolutely no reason to suspect him. Tyrion's logic is simply bankrupt.
Now, in the previous video, we already debunked the idea that Littlefinger is receiving some kind of commands from the Three-Eyed Crow or the Great Other or something like that. So I think when we're looking at this next scenario, building off what we've already determined in our past explorations, we should lend some credence to Preston Jacobs' theories here. You're probably thinking this is contradictory. You rejected Preston Jacobs' conceptions about Littlefinger's early life, but you're investing in Preston Jacobs' conceptions about his current life. And yes, I think Preston Jacobs did some really solid groundwork and has proved his point very well in these other videos, and I don't think it was quite the same way in his original videos. Preston Jacobs forwards the idea that it may not have been Joffrey at all, and puts forward some very good deductions and evidence as to why Joffrey is not a likely candidate for this murder. Preston is also able to construct a strong case to link Littlefinger to the killing. Now, to be fair to Preston's video, he actually comes to two separate conclusions here. However, I think when examined, the Littlefinger conclusion is much more sensible.
The first such character is Littlefinger's unnamed agent. And yes, Littlefinger definitely had a man at Winterfell. If you remember, back in A Game of Thrones, after Bran's fall, a mysterious character leaves a box for Maester Luwin. The box contains a mirrorish lens, making Luwin think he must look closer. Lo and behold, hidden in the box is a message from Lysa, lying to Catelyn and telling her that Jon Arryn was murdered by the Lannisters. A couple of books later, in A Storm of Swords, we find out that Lysa was instructed to write this letter by Littlefinger. So it seems that the two of them together arranged for this agent to head to Winterfell and drop off the box. Now, of course, this letter is interesting. It definitely shows that Littlefinger was trying to create a Stark-Lannister feud. The letter caused Ned to come south to King's Landing to find the truth about Jon Arryn's murder, and then Littlefinger provided Ned a list of servants he should talk to, and then the servants pointed Ned in the direction of the Armorer, where Ned finds Gendry, and in the direction of the brothel, where he finds the Babe. In fact, Littlefinger himself brings Ned to this brothel. And so Ned was well on his way to discovering Cersei's infidelity, largely thanks to Littlefinger. Now on the one hand, it's pretty clear that a Littlefinger-caused conflict was going to happen with or without the dagger. On the other hand, the dagger does play beautifully into Littlefinger's hand. Almost too beautifully. Of all the daggers that the Catspaw uses, it just so happens to be Littlefinger's dagger? And when Cat tells Ned about the dagger in King's Landing, the whole meeting allows Littlefinger to gain trust with Ned. And the lie that Littlefinger tells that it's Tyrion's dagger leads to Cat kidnapping Tyrion, which essentially sparks the war.
So why am I even exploring these options, and why am I even telling you to add them to your conceptualization of Littlefinger 2.0? Well, it's because we're about to hit the end of the video, and we're going to have to pick this up again in part 3, where we will, as I promised long ago in the beginning of the first video, put forth our own ideas of what's happening with Littlefinger and construct a unifying and comprehensive theory of Littlefinger from point A to point Winds of Winter. So I know these incoherent ramblings have been a lot to sit through, but I hope that you will come back next time and join me for part 3